Welcome to Season 3 of the Knack for Business podcast, over 350 episodes strong. We're here to ignite your entrepreneurial spirit with fresh insights, networking gems, and creative strategies that elevate your game.
From an audience perspective, why do you keep getting in your own way, even when you know what you should be doing to grow your business? How our own thinking patterns can sabotage progress, and more importantly, how to shift out of survival mode into a more resourceful, focused, and collaborative mindset. Have you ever felt stuck, overwhelmed, or like you're circling the same problems? Listen to Mitch as he shares powerful tools from his mind-shifting method, stories from his own success journey, and steps you can take right now to help retrain your brain for success. Our guest today is Weisburgh. Mitch is on a mission to grow a community of people who lead happy, productive lives by becoming more resilient, resourceful, and collaborative, especially when facing challenges. With a rich history of leadership, Mitch began by founding Personal Computer Learning Centers of America, growing it to over 130 employees. Later, he co-founded Academic Business Advisors, supporting organizations that aim to reach and uplift more students in the U.S. schools. Mitch also has launched nonprofit education ventures such as Games for Ed and EdChat Interactive. Since 2018, he's been writing, speaking, and teaching about mind-shifting techniques to reframe the thoughts that hold us back and sense-making, helping people interpret and navigate change. His book, MindShifting, was released in December 2024, and now he leads the MindShifting community for educators, along with his newsletter, MindShifting Educators, designed to spark new ways of thinking and learning. Mitch, it's been a while. Welcome back to having a chat with myself and Wade. Do you have a favorite quote or saying, sir?
I thought about that, and I'm going to go with saying, what shuts off what you can learn? The path to happiness and success starts with curiosity.
There's a cat in that story, I can tell you. What swung that into focus of, you know what, this is an answer?
And this started around 2017, 2018. At the time, I was advising education publishers on technology and how to reach more students, how to help them learn. I'd been doing this for about 14 or 15 years. One of the things that was happening is in my brain, it's like you got into education to give kids a leg up on their lives. And in 15 years, things haven't really improved. Education was not doing a significantly better job preparing kids for adulthood. So you've got to come up with something that's actually going to make a difference. I received an email from a university in Niger in Africa, which is one of the poorest countries in the world, saying they wanted some U.S. education technology entrepreneurs to talk to their undergraduates about education technology in the U.S. And I'm like, I don't think that having a U.S. ed tech person talk to these undergraduates in a completely different country is going to really help them. Kids need to learn how to make sense of situations and how successful people make sense of situations so they can be successful. And so I wrote back and said, I can teach these kids how successful people make sense of situations, how they control their minds in order to be successful, how they're resourceful and resilient. We went back and forth, and what I agreed to do was 6 months, fly out to Niger and teach two-day workshops for their undergraduates. Then it dawns on me like, hey, Mitch, you don't know how to do this. The typical entrepreneur, like, you promise something because you know that it can be done, and then all of a sudden you get your first customer and you figure out how to do it. But I had 6 months. So I decided, let me read books on how people make different types of decisions. So I read books on psychology, neuroscience, cognitive science, on coaching, on organizational strategy, on military strategy, on economics. And you can really tell that all these different disciplines had a slice of how people think about different situations, but nobody really was putting it all together. And so what I tried to do is put together a 2-day workshop that curated what I found the techniques that really seemed to resonate with me, that I thought would resonate with others. Took that 2-day workshop, flew to Niger, greet the first group of 65, 70 kids, start teaching them. And at the end of the 2 days, and the kids stood up and cheered. And that's when it dawned on me, all this stuff about ed tech and getting more technology in the classroom. That's just a tool. This is something that kids can really use because nobody tells them that just because you think that you can't do something doesn't mean you can't. Just because you think something is true, that's just a story going through your head. Just because you're upset at something doesn't mean you have to be upset. You can choose to have a different reaction. And when they started seeing those things, they became more powerful. That was in 2018. Now it's 2025. And I'm still in touch with 6 or 7 of those. Well, they're not kids anymore. They weren't kids then either. They're like 18 to 25. But I'm still in touch with 6, 7, 8 of those people. That's what got me in it.
As a coach, when did you first clue in that one of the biggest sabotages to your success was actually you? What was your brain telling you wrong?
My wife's been telling me I'm wrong ever since we got married. That was 40 years ago. To seriously answer your question, the first time that happened to me, I guess it was around 1985, 86. I attended a course in self-improvement, like a one-day session. The woman giving the course said, it's not the situation that determines your attitude. It's your attitude that determines your attitude. She used the example of being stuck in traffic. You could be stuck in traffic and thinking, I've got this meeting, I'm going to be late, things are going to go wrong. Why does this always happen to me? Or sometimes you're stuck in traffic and you're thinking, wow, I'm listening to a really good book, or I'm listening to music, or I'm having a good conversation. And it's the same traffic. I listened to her and, I was 27, 28 years old. So, it's like, well, okay, this is kind of interesting. But like 4 days later, I'm stuck in traffic. And I had a really big sales call. I was the president of the company. The salesperson had brought in their largest contact. This was going to be the meeting to close it. And I'm stuck in traffic and I'm going to be late. And all these things are going on in my head. And I'm like, well, you know something? I'm going to use what she said. So I called the salesperson and she's like, well, Mitch, I can handle this. I just thought it'd be kind of cool if you were there too. But, I can close this on my own. And so kind of relaxed and listen to music. And it turns out I got there in time for the meeting anyhow, and we closed the business and everything. But that was the thing that really convinced me, something, our brain does things to sabotage our happiness and success. And when we realize that, we can change it. I'm going to come back to you because you're a coach, right? You see this with your clients and the people that you advise. You see them turn around when they realize that they have power, right?
One of the things I try to do is from Wizard of Oz, ignore the little man behind the curtain.
Right. Yes.
The interesting thing that is so brilliant to me that I learned about coaching is that it isn't that I'm telling them how it is. It's they're telling me how it is and they understand. It's two totally different things. It's not what I tell them at all. It's what they understand is happening.
And to me, one of the things that hit me with that is this whole field of motivational interviewing. So in motivational interviewing, the premise is that people have the ability to be resourceful to get themselves out of holes. Our job in talking to them is to prod them with questions so that they understand what are the ambiguities, what are the things that conflict in their minds, and help them make their own choices. Because when we say something, it automatically triggers this reaction subconsciously that, oh my gosh, this person's attacking me. I have to say no, or I have to attack back. But when they say it to themselves, it really means a lot more. And it's a sign that they're willing to change.
So what's survival brain when someone's in that headspace?
There's really 2 parts to our brain. There's the parts that started evolving, 300-400 million years ago, that were first used by the very first animals capable of moving. And we generally call those parts of the brain our limbic system. The purpose of our limbic system is basically survival. We have to move, assess whether something is dangerous, take action, and take in information really quickly, not having the full story, come up with something to do, and then do it in order to survive. And then somewhere around 100 million years ago, towards the beginning of the first mammals, we started developing another part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex. In the prefrontal cortex, that's where we have resourcefulness. That's where we have empathy. That's where we have executive function. And one of the issues is that survival parts of the brain wakes up from some stimulus in like 2/100ths of a second, whereas the prefrontal cortex wakes up in 2 to 3 seconds. So our survival parts of the brain are often making decisions about what to do before our prefrontal cortex has even woken up. Once the limbic system, the survival brain, has decided on what to do, anything that challenges that is regarded as a threat because the animal has to be focused on survival. And so that those parts of the brain then start secreting cortisol and adrenaline, which focuses our whole organization on fight, flight, or freeze. And so then we lose access to our prefrontal cortex because those hormones actually limit the ability of our prefrontal cortex to act. And so when we're in survival mode, we're often reacting as if we're in danger. And we tend to have 5 different types of reactions in those circumstances. We hear about fight, flight, or freeze, right? We're going to run away. We're going to fight. We're going to do nothing and hope the problem runs away. And then 2 more, which is we rely on the things that we already know how to do without thinking. Those are habits or things that we're fluent in. And then the 5th thing is we're very social animals. So we look around and we copy what everybody else is doing without having to think about it. Those are the 5 things that the survival brain allows us to do. Whereas we think about the prefrontal cortex, that allows us to be empathetic. It allows us to be exploratory. It allows us to innovate with other people. It allows us to align what we're doing to what's really important to us. And it allows us to do things being open to the fact that feedback's going to come in and we're going to have to adjust what we're doing based on unfolding circumstances. So we can't do any of those things when we're in survival mode and we have those fear hormones that are just flooding our prefrontal cortex and stopping it from action.
There's like 2 parts to this. And I get it. Like, if you're caught off guard, you'll automatically do what comes natural. It's almost like someone who speaks another language, right? Grew up in another country. When they're caught off guard, you'll hear their mother tongue coming out as opposed to what we're operating now. Do you find that training and like EMS, anybody that's in the armed forces, paramilitary, or even medical emergency inside a hospital, you go training exercises, does that help mitigate the survival brain and best choice, best path based on the urgency as opposed to, oh, I've got to give a presentation in 5 minutes. Panic, but not, it's not life and death.
I think there's 2 different answers to the question. Does training help or what helps? In the military, they have this method of training yourself to be resourceful. It was developed by an Air Force pilot, John Boyd, and he called it OODA loops: observe, orient, decide, and act. There's actually 2 different loops in OODA loop. One loop is when you have time, you're thinking about a situation like, how would I react to that? Or you're in a situation and you're not sure what to do and you actually have time to think about it. And so in that slower version of the OODA loop, you're first observing what's going on. You're orienting, coming up with possible things you could do based on your experience, based on analysis, based on synthesis. So you're coming up with different things that you could possibly do. You're trying to predict what's likely to happen. So you come up with a list of things that you could possibly do. That's the orient stage. In the decide stage, you're coming up with, what do you think I'll try? And then in the act stage, you're doing it, but it's a loop. So you're watching what you're doing. You're watching what you think the results are going to be. And then that's the observe. And then you orient again, and you keep on going through that loop. The slow OODA loop requires you to really think about, what could I be doing? What might happen? What might this person say, etc. When you're in the moment, you really don't have time to think. The purpose of that slow OODA loop is to give yourself new habits or fluencies so that when you get into the moment, you're doing that OODA loop really fast. You're observing, you're somewhat consciously or unconsciously coming up with the different things that you could possibly do, deciding on one of them, acting, seeing what the other person or the other side did. You're observing that, you're coming up with the next thing. And the better able you are to go through those loops fast and effectively, the more likely you are to prevail, whether you're in a competition, you're in a fight, you're in a challenge. The purpose of that loop is to use that slow loop to come up with things that you might be able to do, practice them, and then use the fast loop when you're in the moment so you don't have to really think about these things, but you have them already embedded. So that's one answer about the training, because the training is ideally not the training to, okay, here's a manual, here's what you do in this circumstances. The best training is, here's a situation, how do you think you're going to react? What do you think is going to happen? What do you think the other side's going to do? What's going to be the results? Now, how are you going to react to that? And to get you thinking in terms of simulations and enactments of real problems. How do you improve from being in survival mode is just in general, getting out of survival mode. There's basically 4 different things that we can do. The first thing is to be aware that we're in survival mode. Very often that means being aware that you're sure of something, or that it's a binary situation. There's one clearly good choice, there's one clearly bad choice, and you've got to choose one of those two. When you're upset or angry or anxious, those are all signs that you're in survival mode. And that self-awareness, sometimes that's just enough. Like you're in a situation, you say, oh, geez, I'm in survival mode. What else could I do? Sometimes you can just come out of it like that. Sometimes positive self-talk or affirmations or questions to yourself can get you out of it. What are other things I could do? Or, gee, I'm aware I'm in survival mode. If I couldn't do the thing that I wanted to do, what else could I do? Or if the worst thing happened, do I think that I could survive it? Yeah, I could survive it. Okay. Questions like that can sometimes help you get out of survival mode. And third is some type of distraction, where it could be meditation, it could be mindfulness, it could be going for a walk, it could be listening to music, but something that gets your mind off of focusing on the particular problem that's causing you this anxiety or causing you to be in survival mode, so that the hormones go down so that you do get access to your prefrontal cortex. So those are the 3 things that you can do by yourself. But there are times for all of us that we can't do that for ourselves. There was a time I was so angry at somebody, and they were clearly wrong. I was obviously right, but I did the meditation. I did the positive affirmations. I did the self-awareness, and it moved me down a little bit, but not enough. I called my son, who's an adult, like, Herbie, I am just so angry about this that just happened, and I can't get access to my resourcefulness. And he's like, Daddy, you wrote the book. What do you mean you can't do it? And I'm like, I can't do it myself. He says, okay, I'll tell you what, I'm going to use the book and I'll walk you through something. And he walked me through 1 or 2 things from the book. Just having another person do that, a coach, a friend, a spouse, if the spouse isn't the one who caused you to go into it in the first place, right? But having another person walk you through some of the techniques to be able to disentangle yourself is really the 4th way that I know of getting out of survival mode.
So there's 2 times in our life cycle that hormones, not necessarily the only 2 times, but, depending which, I'm going to leave one part of that story alone. I'm going to focus on men. There's typically 2 times where the hormones, the wrong head's thinking, usually in the teen or when they go in midlife crisis mode. How do you circumvent the, if your gut's super hungry, you're super hungry, right? Or lack of sleep, you become a bear. How do you get that, aside from recognizing it, how do you resolve that so it doesn't cloud your choices?
Well, being aware of it is the first step. Theoretically, you could talk to yourself or distract yourself. If you can access what you would really like to happen, very often it's like, well, what would I ideally like to happen over the course of the next few months or the next week as a result of this? And that then sometimes causes you to jump out of the moment and to be able to access those resourceful parts, which then quiet the hormones. And then I had another one that I was thinking of and it just flew off, but it's basically thinking of what you would most like, or saying, something, I'm really upset with this person. I disagree with everything that this person is saying and my hormones are flying. What if I talk to this person and instead of trying to judge what they're saying, what if my only purpose in talking to them is to see if we can come up with a connection? And so I'm going to just deal my questions with, asking questions of this other person to have them explain themselves and talk about things they feel about one side or another. I'm just going to see if we can have a connection. That's another way of de-stressing yourself. I also talk in the book about stress, which encourages the production of those hormones. I talked about 3 different types of stress. What we think of stress is what I would call these 3 different types of stress, distress. This is an event that causes us to feel stressed. There are also stressors that motivate us. If we're playing a game and we think that the other person is a little bit better than us, or we really want to beat them, and we're having fun, it's not like we then say, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do because this just happened. We think, oh my gosh, this happened. I wonder what I could respond. And that motivates us to do better. I would call that eustress in a large number of cases. Whether you regard something as distress or eustress is in your head. And you can control that. When you feel really stressed out, you can ask yourself, how do I convert this into something motivating rather than debilitating? The third type of stress that I talk about is chronic stress. In chronic stress, your brain isn't capable of getting out of it. And you probably need somebody trained to help you navigate the situation. And it's not like chronic stress is something that's that rare, because the studies are showing that 30 or to 40% of the population at any one time is undergoing chronic stress and really needs that help. So a lot of the people we're dealing with are in chronic stress, and we can say something that seems very innocuous, and just because they're under chronic stress, it triggers them like that, and they can't help but react in a survival fight-flight mode. So I'd say realization, trying to convert what's stressing us out into eustress, and understanding that if we've got like 5 or 6 things that are all hitting us at once, and we're chronically depressed or we're in some type of chronic stress, then we need somebody professional to help us smooth it out, because that's really above our ability to do it for ourselves.
Your first business trained hundreds of thousands of people, which is pretty cool. How much of that has reflected in your mindset business model? Did anything shock you? Did you have, or now I know exactly what not to do?
So the first question is, what have I carried over from that first business? In that first business, we taught people how to use computers. That's, I was initially going to business school and working, and I bought an Apple II Plus computer. This is 1981. And I bought the very first spreadsheet program, VisiCalc. I was doing my homework in business school in less than a third the time of anybody else in my class, because at that time, you were manually calculating every single calculation. You were handwriting your papers. Maybe you typed them out at some point, but it's not like you could type them out and just move a paragraph. If you needed to move a paragraph, you had to retype those pages. And I was using WordStar as a word processor. And I'm telling my dad about that. And this guy jumps out and says, we're on the train. The guy says, all I want to do is I want to do cash flow analysis. Can you just show me how to do a cash flow analysis? I have no idea how to do it on a computer. So I started showing him. And what I came up with based on those is that if you give people like graduated difficulty in problems, and they start off and kind of understand, oh, here's a problem that I face, I need to learn some techniques on how to do that. If you could impart those techniques in a relatively short amount of time, give them a chance to practice, and then give them a more difficult problem to solve, that was a really good way of teaching. So that method of teaching and designing instructional materials, which we called at the time need, concept, keystroke. First, people understand the need to learn something, then show them the concepts. And then what we were doing was keystrokes, but it's the actions. Once they understand the need and the concepts, show them exactly what to do, and then give them time to practice so you can move on. That's what's really carried into MindShifting, because that whole instructional design element is baked into the book, classes, and the online course. It's really funny when you say, did it ever dawn on me about something that was really stupid? One of the very first things I had to do is I trained computer operators how to enter accounting information into a computer. At that time, there was no error checking in the computer. It popped into my head that the best way to learn was to make a mistake and learn from your mistake. And so this poor woman, she's entering a day's worth of invoices. And I notice on the very first invoice, she's making a mistake, which is going to reject the information on that invoice. I decided I'm just going to let her make the mistake. For 6 hours, she made that mistake over and over again. The next day, the errors came out and everything she had worked out for the entire day rejected. And I'm like, I thought it was important for you to learn from your mistakes. And my boss just absolutely chewed me out. It's one thing to let a person learn from their mistake for a minute. It's another thing to make person work for 6 hours and make the exact same mistake for 6 hours. I've got the president of her company yelling at me that we wasted their time. Now I have to have a programmer recode all this stuff that she did because you were so stupid to let her make the mistake for 6 hours. You're lucky I'm not firing you on the spot. I learned that you can let people make mistakes, but don't make it so bad a mistake that it's going to take a day or two to recover from it.
Sounds like a two for it.
Right.
I feel for the person too, and for both of you, but I get the idea. You do learn through that concept. Mind shifting in the team space. How do you make that happen? It's one thing to meditate, breathe, smile, stop reacting. Why am I reacting? Park it and then action it. May not like the circumstance, but action it in a calm manner, right? Right.
Yeah.
Have a rational thought. How do you make that a cultural fit for the people around you?
When you're working with other people, to a certain extent, you're trying to come up and jointly have everybody engaged and motivated to work on the same things. In order for that to take place, there's materials in each of the 3 courses, but I'm going to talk about the middle one first, which is the resilience course. That's involved to a certain extent with what I call sense making, which is to understand that our natural tendency when faced with a situation is to assume that there's one right answer, that we're going to come up where we already have the one right answer, that if anybody else has anything different, that they're wrong. And when we do it, it's going to work. And then we can move on to the next problem. And none of those things are true in most circumstances. So to be able to go into circumstances as a team and understand, yes, there are certain things where the solution is pretty obvious. If I'm thirsty and I have this cup here, it's a simple solution to just take a sip of water. Those are the simple situations. And that's how, by default, our brains think about solving problems. But then to understand also that there are complicated situations. And in a complicated situation, we may not have all the answers. We may not have all the information we need. We may need to do some analysis on the information after we gather it. We may need some expertise in order to advise us. We may need some expertise in order to execute whatever we come up with. And in most cases where the situation is complicated, there's going to be more than one possible answer that could work. And there may be some trade-offs that are involved. But it's much more important to have everybody on board with a solution than for the absolute best solution, because we'll never really find the absolute best solution. So if you think about problem solving, when we go into let's say if we wanted to design a school or a building, and we talk to 6 different architects, and if those architects are well trained, they would come up with 6 different drawings, and every drawing would be different. But it wouldn't matter that much. Whichever architect we went to, we would probably get a building that met our needs. What we do is we couldn't say to the electrician who is vested in one idea, okay, you can follow this architect, and the plumber, you can follow this architect, and the carpenter, you can follow this architect. We all have to be aligned to be able to recognize that in a complicated solution, nobody needs to fight for their solution because their solution is probably fine, but we have to make a decision and put our efforts into execution rather than defining the solution. That changes the whole dynamic of group decision-making. Then there's a third type of problem where nobody really knows the answer because it's new. And I think COVID was the perfect example of that. Nobody knew how it was going to be transmitted to people. Nobody knew how many people are going to be dying from it. Nobody knew how fast it was going to spread. All these questions nobody really knew. And yet we treated it as if an expert had the one right answer. Whatever is going to eventually work can't be predicted in advance. It can only be seen in hindsight. Like in hindsight, we could say, oh, yeah, we knew this was going to work, but we never knew it was going to work until something actually worked. In those complex situations, having an expert run the decision making is probably the worst thing you can do, because an expert is a person vested and trained in a particular way of solving a problem. Every problem then becomes a nail so that their hammer is going to work. Another aspect of complex situations is that we have to go into the situations understanding we're going to be trying different things. Whatever we try is probably not going to solve the problem, but it's going to give us information, and we can use that information to adjust and come up with the next thing to try. If we go into problems as a group and understand that these are complex situations, it's no longer like, I think we should do this solution and anything else is wrong. It's like, what are a couple things that we can try that aren't going to really hurt us, that could give us really good information that we can then use and adjust? Aligning teams about whether a problem is simple, that there really is a clear one solution, or whether they're complex, meaning that there could be multiple solutions, but we may need more data, we may need analysis, we may need expertise, or it's a complex situation, which means that nobody really knows what's going to work. And so we have to come up with probes or experiments to try in order to get information. And then there's situations where we're in danger. And in those situations, what we have to do is we have to figure out, how to get safe first. And there are people who are incredibly capable at convincing us that we're in those chaotic, urgent situations, even when we're not. And to be able to have the group start recognizing, wait a minute, just because this person says, this is an immediate problem and we have to do it this way, and I'm the person who's going to help you solve the problem, to be able to step back and say, who says that this is something that's urgent, that we have to take action right away? Why don't we just think about it? Or maybe this is an emergency situation. Let's do something. The house is on fire. We got to get out of the house. And we can't worry about how we're going to fireproof the house for the next time. First, we have to get out of the house. Then we have to get the fire put out. Then we can think about what to do in the long term. Getting teams to recognize those different parts of the situation changes the whole dynamic of decision making and allows you to align the team around whatever the solutions are that you're enacting.
Conflict. When it is a useful collaborative tool and when it is a train wreck?
The simple answer is that if you're in a fight with your spouse, the collaborative tool is to do what your spouse says, and then it won't be a train wreck. In conflict, I think a lot of the conflict is understanding that there's more than one way to solve conflicts. And I'm a big advocate of I think it's a Thomas Kilmann conflict resolution instrument, which helps you define how you go about solving problems. In that problem-solving model, there's 5 different ways to solve problems. Without thinking about it, we tend to gravitate to one way, but understanding that there's 5 different ways of solving problems allows us to take a look at a situation and say, well, something in this case, I need to get my suggestion through to everybody. In this case, what's most important is that we collaborate. Let's come up with a way of compromising. Something, why don't I accommodate and let this person take charge? Or in this case, this person is never going to come along with what the rest of the group wants to do. Let's come up with a way of avoiding dealing with this conflict with this person. One way is understanding those 5 different methods of solving conflict. If we're going to collaborate, which is if we're going to come up with possible solutions that are going to be beneficial to all parties, and solutions that are likely better than any one of us could come up with, in order for that to take place, all the parties have to be in this prefrontal cortex resourceful mode, because you can't have one party in fight or flight mode and another party trying to be resourceful. The person who's in fight or flight mode is going to take any signs of openings as signs of weakness, not as signs of trying to come up with a better solution. And so using techniques to make sure you are in resourceful mode, even when the other person is saying or doing things which would ordinarily trigger you, allows you to then move the conflict forward. You still could decide that you need to dictate what has to be done or that you're going to accommodate. But if you can ask questions to get the other person into a collaborative mode, if you can first exhibit some type of empathy, which could start a conversation about things interesting to the other person. Maybe it's things that have nothing to do with the problem at all. Like if the person is really interested in golf, maybe you start talking about golf with the person and you establish a connection. Once you've had the connection with that person, you can start moving towards the actual problem. And instead of offering solutions, talk about what goals are. Now, somebody's initial goal is probably going to be the solution that they came up with. So it's like, well, what do you aim to do? Well, I aim to get started on this project by doing so-and-so tomorrow. That's not the person's goal. What's the advantage of doing that for you? What's the benefit to you of that? Until you really get the person to the point where they're talking about what they really need. And so you move that person from, I have to do this, to, I would like this to happen. And maybe there are multiple ways of that happening. And then you can also let them know what's important to you and come up with ways that both your needs get satisfied. Those are some of the techniques that I would advocate for.
Wow, it sounds like hostage negotiation and a few other things, or just negotiations in general.
Sales, it's what we do in sales. How do people take their clients out on golf outings to establish rapport so that by the 15th or 16th hole, you're saying, wow, isn't this fun? We play golf. And by the way, I was thinking about your issue about so-and-so, and you start leading them into some decision. So it's in sales, it's in management, it's in teaching, it's in hostage negotiation. It's really any time where we think what somebody would naturally do may not be in their best interest, and we want to help them come up with better strategies.
You have a couple of books that are out, one that's coming up. Tell us about the books and where we can get them.
So the first book is out, and that's MindShifting, Stop Your Brain from Sabotaging Your Happiness and Success. And that book is available on Amazon, and you can get it print or Kindle or Audible. And that book is about the resourceful step of mind shifting. So I think of mind shifting as three different steps. One is being resourceful, which is being able to access those sage or resourceful parts of your own brain and to recognize when other people aren't resourceful and maybe a few things to help them. That book is out. The second element in mind shifting, which will actually be the third book, is how do we react to situations, where I was talking about the simple situations, complicated, complex, and urgent situations. That will actually end up being the third book. That won't be out for another year and a half. But the second book, which is kind of the third element when I think of mind shifting, is that conflict and collaboration. That book will be out by the end of October, maybe earlier. I've been through 4 edits of that book so far. On Monday, I'm handing it over to a professional editor. It's a straight shot to eventually getting that book published. And that book will also be available on Amazon. And that's dealing with the 5 different styles of handling conflict. There's a lot in that book about how do you reach rapport with people? How do you use motivational interviewing when you're managing people or teaching people or selling to people? How do you use nonviolent communications? How do you judge whether a person is feeling, I guess, good, or whether they're feeling anxious, and things that you can do to help them move from anxiety or fear into a wellness frame of mind so that they can move forward. And again, that's managing, selling, teaching, basically anytime you're trying to influence another person.
I got a great question to wrap up. Your perfect prospect, how does he know he needs you? And how does he get a hold of you if he does need you?
So I would say that if a person has any desire to improve their own resourcefulness and resilience, the book, Mind Shifting, Stop Your Brain from Sabotaging Your Happiness and Success, it's like $20. So if anybody is listening to this podcast, is it worth $20 to find out if this book is going to help? Read it for 15 minutes. And if after 15 minutes you don't feel it's going to be helpful, then big deal. You just wasted $20. It's not the worst thing in the world. So I would say you don't need to really say, oh, things are really miserable. It's just like, hey, if you want to try something, there's 50 different techniques in the book that allow you to either quiet your limbic brain or tap into the powers of your resourceful brain And some of those are going to resonate with you. And then the second book will be out in October. The blog is at mindshiftingwithmitch.blog, but I also have a website, mindshiftingwithmitch.com. And so if you go to mindshiftingwithmitch.com, and there's a link from the blog to the .com one also, but from mindshiftingwithmitch.com, you'll find out about resourcefulness, resilience, and collaboration. You'll find out about live courses which are taking place. You'll find out a little bit about the online AI-based course, which will be coming out in October. And there'll be links to sign up for the newsletter, which hopefully every week there's one or two tips on either events that happened and how our leaders demonstrated the precepts of mind shifting, or how they missed an opportunity to be resourceful and resilient, but how you could learn from that and be more resourceful and resilient yourself.
Wow. Mitchell Weisburgh, thank you. I appreciate you coming in today and sharing us. There's a lot of story here and a lot of ways to approach things that give you better outcomes. My co-host Wayne Pratt and the Knack for Business listeners, appreciate your time. Mitch has built a $10 million training company to launching education initiatives that impact thousands. You can hear most of the story that's already happened. And it's all about empowering your mind and shifting the gears. Reach out to Mitch, because that could make a major change, either with your business or with your significant other, or with your offspring too, or other people's offspring if you're a teacher.
To reach the podcast hosts, email them at info@creativeinsight.com or by the website creativeinsight.com, spelled KREATINSIHT.com. To reach Wayne at his email, wayne@motive8u.ca, that is MOTIVE, the numeral 8 and the letter u.ca, or his website, motive8u.ca. If you would like to be a guest on this podcast and share your knowledge, let us know. We would also appreciate your feedback on the content or format. Check the show notes for more details. For these podcasts, we like to acknowledge the support and thanks to the following people: Carl Richards from Podcast Solutions Made Simple, a renowned podcast expert; Fred Crouch, who is the Property Wizard podcaster, where Bernie is a co-host; Jovan Strika from At Hive, a co-working space that is more than just a space; then Melanie Weber, Bernie's invaluable business partner; and Wayne Pratt from Motivate You Inc., who serves as both a coach and co-host of these podcasts. Disclaimer: please note that the Knack for Business podcast episodes are meant solely for educational and general informational purposes. The information and opinions contained within are not intended to be professional advice on any subject matter. The thoughts, views, and opinions expressed by the participants are their own personal beliefs and do not represent the views of the podcast hosts or any affiliated organizations. It is important to note that this podcast is not a replacement for consulting with certified experts in your area who possess knowledge of your unique situation. The hosts of the podcast, along with any participants or affiliated groups, do not take responsibility for any actions taken or not taken based on the information presented in this episode. It is highly recommended that individuals seek guidance from their own personal advisors in fields such as accounting, law, or other pertinent areas prior to undertaking any actions or making decisions that may impact their financial, legal, or other aspects of life.